1980s, after a process the community went through to recommend some changes to our arts infrastructure. Interestingly, we just went through that process, and many of us from both the first set of processes and this current one that ended in 2006 decided it was time to re-charter the San Francisco Arts Democratic Club. We received our chartering from the Democratic County Central Committee at the end of May and have been meeting ever since. The goals of our club are to forward a lot of the recommendations that we came up with in the Arts Task Force report. That's available on our website, along with many other documents about arts funding at www.sfadc.org. The task force was put together by then Supervisor Tom Amiano, and the process went on for nearly 2 years, where we discussed our arts infrastructure and funding, and made some really strong recommendations from the arts community, large and small organization, individual artists, ballet, opera, and symphony were in the house, and we came together with these recommendations for the purpose of helping the city meet its arts element of its general plan, and to make our arts delivery more effective, more citywide, and more accessible across the different communities of San Francisco. I am really honored tonight to be joined by the rest of the members of the officers of the Democratic Club. If we can stand up, Brenda Berlin, who also is involved in the first Arts Democratic Club, Scott Kuiper, Vinay Patel. Vinay is right there. We also have Pam Wu right there, who's working a lot on the Political Action Committee. It's hard to see with these lights. Tony Kelly, right there. Mark Vogel actually was on the Arts Task Force. There's a lot of people who put a lot of energy into these policies, and so we decided to bring our candidates here to talk to us from their perspective as people who know our city bureaucracy, who know what the arts are capable of. Both of them have a strong history. All of them, all the candidates coming tonight have a strong history of supporting our arts. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is bring up Vinay Patel, who's our Vice President, who will be the moderator for the first question. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank London Breeden, the African American Arts and Culture Complex, for hosting this event tonight, working with us in the community. Cultural centers is one of our key gifts that the city has for our city. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Vinay Patel to guide you through the first. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Deborah Walker, President of the Arts Democratic Club. I don't think you introduced yourself like that. So, I want to thank everybody for coming out here. My name is Vinay Patel, and I'm going to be moderating the first question. I'm just going to jump right in respect of our esteemed guest time. And so, first off, we have City Attorney Dennis Herrera and Senator Leland Yee. So we want to thank you for coming out here. So, thank you, everyone. So the process is going to be for me to read the question, and then 5 minutes for each of you to answer the question, followed up with 1 minute, and then a rebuttal of 1 minute if necessary, and then questions from
5 minutes, and then opposition and rebuttal, and then the next candidate.
And then questions from the audience. So I'll jump into the first question. In the 1980s, San Francisco began our cultural centers and cultural equity programs, largely in response to a report issued by a task force that then had identified the lack of cultural equity in the existing granting program, Grants for the Arts. Grants were shown to go overwhelmingly to large organizations that had limited reach to the culturally diverse audience. The Cultural Center programs were created and funded through the Arts Commission to add to the Neighborhood Arts Program. In the ensuing years, all the arts funding has been cut as much as 20%. The state and federal programs are essentially gone. In 2006, the Arts Task Force reiterated the same concerns expressed in the 1980s, that we have underfunded community arts and services to artists, and pointed out the funding cuts affect our systematic undermining. The funding cuts affect our systematic undermining our neighborhood arts, cultural events, and cultural spaces. The group at the time recommended a better coordinated arts infrastructure that would then be responsible to the arts element of the San Francisco General Plan. There have been some positive steps. The recent addition of the Artists in Community program through the Arts Commission that pairs individual artists with social service organizations, but we still lack coordinated policy and programs necessary to achieve the goals laid out by the master plan. Structural fragmentation of our art support and policy still hamstrings big picture coordination and planning and has allowed funding cuts to systematically erode our arts community. What steps would you take as mayor to restructure the delivery of the arts in San Francisco to deliver equal access to the arts for all communities across our city and a renewed effort to include arts more successfully in our policy and planning? Mr. Herrera.
Thank you for the question. And first I want to compliment the Arts Democratic Club for reforming and for building on the great work that was done by the Arts Task Force in 2006. And I think that what is important is to recognize that the challenges that were laid out by the Arts Task Force in 2006 built on what we already know was happening back in the 1980s. And everybody always talks a good party line about the importance of the arts. Let's just look at what the official arts policy of San Francisco is: to recognize and sustain the diversity of the cultural expression of art in San Francisco. And that's great. We all mouth that. But what is really important is to look at what the reality is. The reality is that funding has been cut dramatically. We've seen dramatic siphoning of hotel tax revenue. We've seen abandonment of the neighborhood arts plan over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. We see no attention paid to individual artists, and we see poor stabilization efforts for small and mid-sized organizations. And why is that? Number one, because we had really no strategic plan for the arts citywide. We have a lack of a citywide focus, and we have a lack of coordination between arts agencies and other city departments. So this really comes down to having the political leadership to put in place what we all know needs to occur. First and foremost, we have to put our money where our mouth is. We have to restore the hotel tax revenue to the arts industry and give arts agencies control of the dollars that are dedicated to the arts, and not have whatever money is there to be fragmented and not coordinated by the main institution that should be responsible for arts funding. Number two, we need to restore the neighborhood arts programs and expand those programs for both communities that aren't as lucky to have a community-based facility like this one, and for young people. And third, we have to reorganize programs under the Arts Commission and the grants for the arts. And I have to tell you, I said in my questionnaire that I'd be open to have there be a merger with each supervisor getting one appointment from his or her district to a new formatted centralized art commission, which could coordinate and have greater control and coordination effort of the money that is out there. And what would that do? The goal of that would be to create a more substantial and stable support for both large institutions, but more importantly for neighborhood cultural centers and community-based arts nonprofits who have been too long neglected in the city and county of San Francisco. Then we can have a real conversation about how we can develop new programs to promote economic development here in San Francisco that involves the arts industry. Because we all know that the arts industry and the arts community and artists themselves are vital contributors to the economic engine of San Francisco. But we need to live up to what we mouth in terms of policy and have the institutions in place that can coordinate, that can promote, that can increase the visibility of and demonstrates to the public how important it is to have a vibrant arts industry that helps provide cultural opportunities in communities and also provides opportunities for our young people.
Thank you. Senator Leland Yee, same question. Oh,
Can I ask one question? Can you just let us know where we're at on time? Yeah.
2:50,
Okay.
he gets 1 minute, and then you do the same thing. So 5 minutes, so you have a 1 minute follow-up of what he said.
Dennis,
Question?
first, Dennis, I really appreciate, I think, your clear understanding about some of the dynamics that's going on. But clearly, one of the other elements to all of this is that everybody seems to want a piece of the art. And how would you propose we gather all the maybe similar but sometimes disparate, interests in the arts and come together as a city? What ideas and suggestions would you have?
I think that was something that I tried to highlight when I talked about the structural merger that I would champion in terms of the Arts Commission and grants for the arts, to have there be one institution of which each supervisor has a appointee from a particular district. So you're getting a citywide perspective that also has control over arts funding, which now is disparate between different departments. And they would be in control of it, and it would have a neighborhood flavor which represents the interests of every neighborhood in San Francisco. So it can be community-based, looking out for large and small institutions and individual artists to make sure that we are promoting a unified and coordinated arts and cultural policy which benefits the entirety of the city and county of San Francisco.
I've seen Senator Yee. 5-minute question. You want me to repeat the question, please?
Sure.
What steps would you take as mayor to restructure the delivery of arts in San Francisco to deliver equal access to all arts for communities across our city, and a renewed effort to include arts more successfully in our policy and planning?
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate all of your presence here, particularly the Arts Democratic Club, sort of the new and revitalized Arts Democratic Club. I remember the days when I ran in early elections, and I guess Jeff Jones was, I don't know if he's still around.
Right here.
Remember those fond days. And one of the things that San Francisco is to be commended about is the fact that they care about our arts so much. And it is built into our master plan. Just like the housing element, we have an arts element. And unfortunately, the implementation of that arts element has been rather short. And it is, to some extent, because of that you now have, where you had the task force that said, we've got to do a little bit more to move that issue along. And really appreciate, I think, the task force and everyone's participation in that. And I think it's because of my respect for the work of the task force that I want to articulate a little bit more some of its conclusions and how I would see those particular conclusions. I think that there are a variety of different interests that are out there in the area of arts. You have the Arts Commission, you have the grants program, you have the symphony, the orchestra, the performing arts, visual arts, you have neighborhood programs, nonprofit organizations, and then you also have profit-making ventures in the city. And everybody seems to be interested in the arts. And so what I would like to do is to look at streamlining some of the activities. I think as Dennis mentioned, I'd like to also see a consolidation of the Arts Commission and also the grants for the arts. But we need to kind of gradually go beyond just that. What I like to do is to have someone coming out of either the mayor's office or coming out of some organization within the city that deals with arts to be that person that is going to touch every single aspect of our art community, because that's extremely important. We've got to ensure that every voices, every idea, every notion is well integrated into an overall arts agenda, arts policy, arts program. And so bringing all those individuals together is extremely important, and that sort of interdepartmental type person needs to have the cachet to go to these different interest groups and come together and facilitate some coherent plan for this particular city when it comes to art. And I think that we've got to go beyond just simply whatever assets we have within the arts community. We ought to be looking at our schools. We ought to be looking at our libraries. We need to look at other departments within our city that may have some empty space and may have some facilities that may be available, so that there are additional venues that are available for performances, for presentations of some sort. I know of so many different groups that would like, in fact, to put together some kind of an activity, but what they find is that there's no space. There's no space because we're not opening up the space for individuals, and yet we see libraries, we see cafeterias in our schools, we see so many spaces that are just kind of left empty at night. The doors are locked, gates are closed, and we ought to open that up. So that's the kind of change that I want, where we coordinate things a lot better, we're talking to one another, and then we're looking at any and every space that's available so that we have visual and performing arts available to everyone.
Leland mentioned a little bit about, in passing, schools. I get a minute, right? Yes. A minute? Okay, and one thing that is a priority for me is we have Prop H funding, which is scheduled to expire in a couple of years, where we give up to $60 million to the school district to help it succeed in its mission, and at least a portion of that goes to what's called SLAM. And I've advocated on the campaign trail that I want to not only extend the Prop H funding, but expand it from $60 million to $90 million, and increase the money available for the arts. Because I remember when I went to school, I learned how to play an instrument playing in school. And we had a music class, and that was something that was incredibly rounding for me as a student in terms of cultural awareness, but also an activity. So my question, Leland, is in the school, when you were on the school board, I know education's been a big thing for you. What steps were you involved in ensuring that there was expanded music opportunities for kids in SFUSD?
Well, Dennis, thanks for the question. As you can imagine, when we were facing budget cuts upon budget cuts, arts was the first thing to go. And oftentimes, what was really needed was all of us on the Board of Education getting together and saying to the superintendent, you can't do that. You just can't cut the arts program. And so each budget session, what we would end up having to do, just pretty much like the Board of Supervisors, there was kind of like a, unspoken add-back process. We just persuaded the superintendent that you need to add some additional dollars into the budget for arts program. And it was only those kinds of threats that we were able to then get the superintendent to add those dollars back and then provide those kinds of programs. I think all of us understand that, it's not enough to just simply educate kids with the academics, but arts is also very, very important.
Thank you. I'm here to read the second question. Deborah Walker, I'm president of the San Francisco Arts Democratic Club. Funding for the arts, especially neighborhood arts and cultural space support, has diminished. State and federal funding that used to fund artists directly and state education funding have all but disappeared. What steps would you take to increase and secure funding for the arts, including funding for art space development? Would you support increasing and expanding the arts development impact fees that currently are in the C3 district and in public development to fund not just art on site, but art spaces, public arts programming, and maybe even expand the mitigation to citywide large projects? And will you support as the arts component of America's Cup, as we believe, some of us in the arts community believe that there is a mandate to include the arts in these type of public events? And again, why don't you go first this time? 5 minutes with 1 minute follow-up, 2 minute rebuttal, and then flip it.
I'm very much in support and in favor of increasing funding for our arts program. But I think the first thing that we've got to do is that we've got to get an inventory of all of the resources that are available to a variety of different areas, as I indicated, not only out of the general fund, the hotel tax, other performing arts institutions that we have in the city, both government and non-government, and then also all the different nonprofit organizations that are involved in the arts. And we've got to get our house in order as to what is the breadth and depth of funding for our arts program. And then, as I mentioned in my first answer to my answer to the first question, and then getting that discussion across the board and having a clear understanding as to what is it that we want to do, where are the gaps, where are the duplications, and so on. I think that's the first order of business. I think the other is that we've got to, when we're looking at some of the impact fees and whatnot, for me, impact fees are not about just simply now, well, let's go ahead and acquire pieces of art, let's mandate that pieces of art are placed in new structures, new buildings, and so on. I think part of the impact fees is, what is it that we can do to enhance a particular building? For example, when you look at new buildings that are coming out, one of the important things that we've got to do is that those buildings can be art pieces. How do you make it an iconic building? How do you, through the exterior and even the interior, make it such an architectural feat that it becomes an art statement? And one of the things that, as you all know, within San Francisco, one of our important industries is, in fact, the tourist industry. And I want individuals to come to San Francisco, not to just visit Union Square, not just to visit Fisherman's Wharf, but to come into our city and scour throughout our city all the little nooks and crannies of all the different architectural art pieces that are out there. I want to have neighborhoods to have some of those pieces, and so that we have tourists not only visiting certain areas of the city, but all areas of the city. So I think that it is extremely important that we look at all and every which way we can generate additional dollars. But again, what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that those dollars are appropriately handled, so that we don't miss out certain communities, miss out certain areas of the city, and then most importantly, looking at how we best use those impact fees. I think the last point would be that I would agree that with the America's Cup, we have now an opportunity to enhance the art in the area where the America's Cup is going to be running, and the audience will be visiting. We ought not to just simply have an event such as the America's Cup and then find that at the end of the day, when everything is said and done, we are leaving this venue and nothing else comes of it except for all the trash and all the leftovers of that particular event. It is extremely important that we use this as an opportunity to provide some lasting benefits to the people of San Francisco. So those are things that I would be
Senator, one thing I appreciate all your comments. One thing that I didn't hear you talk at all about a lot of artists struggle finding affordable housing. Do you have any thoughts on what we can do as a city to help promote affordable housing for artists?
Well, that is one of our struggle in the city. It's not just for artists, it's for all individuals, trying to find and develop more affordable units. I think the normal strategies that have been used is we go directly to a GO bond. We passed GO bonds in the past. I've supported them. And the problem with the GO bonds is that they are time limited. After you expend that particular those dollars, 100 million, whatever the amount may be, then that's it. I think that we've got to be a lot more creative. And one of the thoughts that I've had is that we ought to allocate some general fund dollars within our budget, and then we would use those dollars to then bond against those dollars and create an ongoing revolving fund for affordable units and affordable development. I think that is going to be a lot longer sustaining, and to that extent, giving us a lot more affordable units throughout the city.
That is great. Those are the prepared questions. And now we've got a microphone over here. Oh, excuse me. Oh, that was the, I'm sorry.
I did it right.
I think it went on. It was a little bit.
I remember the question. Thank you, Senator. Deborah, I want to say you talked a little bit about impact fees and revenue sources, and of course, as I said in the answer to my first question, I talked about the importance of stopping the diversion of hotel tax revenue that has been diverted from the arts over the course of the last number of years to the tune of $20–25 million. And that's something that we have to recapture and make sure that folks are playing by the rules. Now, with respect to the impact fees, I'd be open to amending the planning code, section 429, which talks about developers in new buildings or additions exceeding 25,000 square feet in the C3 downtown to install art boards. But it was interesting. I went and I checked. The Controller's Office reports that revenues derived from the fee total about $146,000 over 6 fiscal years. Not a heck of a lot of money, right? Not a lot of money. And there was one developer, not including one other developer, who opted for an in-kind improvement of about $329,000. That was to the San Francisco Museum of Historical Society. The only reason I say that is, irrespective of whether Senator Yee or I talk about what our willingness to consider expanding impact fees and doing what we can, this comes down to something much broader. And of course, it's about getting the tax revenue that we need, but it's about the most important thing that I can do, or Senator Yee can do, or anybody else can do to ensure that the arts community is a full participant in the development decisions that go on here in the city and county of San Francisco, is to bring an abiding recognition that arts, culture, and entertainment are linchpins of San Francisco's unique quality of life and of our economic development. And that's why structurally, when I talked a little bit about what I wanted to do in terms of merging the Arts Commission and grants for the arts, is to have a more unifying organization that can help set and recognize how we can coordinate city policy to make sure that money is being allocated sufficiently, and that you have a coordinated government response to promote economic development and understand that arts and culture and entertainment are vital components of that. I would agree with Senator Yee, too, that as part of that, you have to make sure that you have an ombudsman, as it were, within the office of the mayor that's devoted strictly to this. But it's all about having a structure that demonstrates that you value what it is that the arts bring to the city, to the community, to economic development, and that we're not just paying lip service to it, but we're putting actions behind it so that you can restructure your governing body so all communities have a stake. And the more that you have all communities having a stake and they're involved in the governmental process, the more you're going to bring a unifying approach to make sure that funding is there. Because we can talk all we want about impact fees and everything else. We need to have as many line items as we can in the budget that show funding that is there and allocated to the arts. And that's why, if you go and look at my jobs plan that I announced on June 4th, right here in this building, I called about a couple of things. Number one was creating an entertainment zone. I said that the entertainment industry is vitally important, and we need to create an entertainment zone so we don't have nightclubs, an entertainment industry that is a vital contributor to our culture be hassled left and right, number one. And number two, while I have said that we can talk all we want about Twitter, and is that going to rejuvenate mid-market? The only thing that's going to rejuvenate mid-market is to create a Market Street creative corridor that once and for all focuses on living up to the promise that we have been debating for generations about examining the closure of Market Street. Stop the little steps and understand that if you want to have a Market Street that is vibrant, it has to be have pedestrian traffic, it needs to have green space, but it needs to be a creative corridor where large and small cultural institutions, nonprofits they're given the ones that are given the incentives to locate on Market Street, so we can be what we should be, like the Ramblas in Barcelona, 16th Street in Denver, where you have a neighborhood planning process, a transit process, a cultural entertainment, a vibrant cultural entertainment industry that is contributing to the vibrancy of Market Street. That's what's going to rejuvenate it, and that's what's going to lead to a vibrant arts industry here in San Francisco.
So those are the questions prepared by the e-board, but now we would like, if anybody has follow-up questions or their own questions, we did. Okay.
You know, I have to ask more questions. Okay, so
I think that there was a mix-up somewhere, but go ahead.
So Dennis, one of the things that I know about you is your son speaks Mandarin. Can you remind me about that? And so, what thoughts do you have, or might you have, about how we might be able to bring artists from other countries into San Francisco, and how that might enhance the art community here in San Francisco?
That's a great question, and it's something that we need to be committed to. I mean, we all know that one of the great joys that we have is when we have visiting artists, whether they be musicians, violinists that come to the symphony who lead to cultural exchange, artist in residence programs in neighborhoods. And that needs to be something that we reach out to and foster and support for music, for large institutions and small, because that is what makes our society so much more interdependent, has us relying on each other, enriches the diversity of San Francisco. I can tell you right now, they're starting to, in my neighborhood, Dogpatch, it's a small one, but we're starting an artist in residence program that's starting right now there on 22nd Street next to the yellow building, which was Ann Hatch. She's starting one on 22nd Street. Anything that can have that cultural exchange is good for an interdependent world, and we need to reach out and do so. You have a partner in that.
Great. Okay, I was so eager to get to all the questions. Sorry about that. We do have a microphone here, so please, if you want to have, if you have a question that you want to ask either of the candidates, you can ask either one directly or ask it of both, and just line up behind the microphone here. We're going to go we started about 10 minutes late, so we're probably going to go for 5 to 10 minutes if there's questions. Anybody have any questions or just want to raise your hand? Yes, Brenda.
Senator Yee, thank you for, first of all, introducing the possibility of a law to limit the San Francisco State University of California salaries and contributions to the workforce. In Sacramento, I used to work for the California Council, but it hasn't that was a long time ago. Can you talk a little bit about the state budget's relationship to the California Council?
Did everybody hear the question? Or should I? So,
I just want to know what's happening with the California Arts Council budget.
The state has cut arts dramatically. It's almost non-existent. It used to be significant, and it's non-existent now. So what about the state funding, Senator?
Sure. Just a brief overview. We've had a $26 billion short. We are, in fact, realigning a number of services, particularly in the health area, social services, even public safety, into the local community, and that is, as you can imagine, putting even greater burden and responsibility on the local government. That's just symptomatic of the fact that we just don't have the votes to raise the revenues that we would like to take care of many, many needs, and that's one of the reasons why you've seen the dramatic decrease of funding, state funding for the arts. The strategy, and Senator Leno is leading that particular charge, is to look at how we might be able to put something on the ballot to try and, independent of the budget itself, to raise some additional revenues for arts program. I think that is still uppermost in a number of us. So that's, I think, the direction that we're going to end up going.
Do you have any ideas about state funding, or do you want to field another question?
I'll field another question.
Okay.
I'll leave the state stuff in.
Okay. Yes, Alma Robinson from California Lawyers for the Arts and Art House.
Thank you all for being here. I'm intrigued that you both mentioned having a liaison or ombudsperson in the mayor's office for the arts. I think that's a wonderful idea. It's something that was floated in previous administrations, but it hasn't happened. What would that person do? What would that be like? How would that enhance our presence here and our
I can tell you, at
vitality?
least from my perspective, I'll let Leland speak for himself. I manage an office of 350 people. I have a $65 million budget. I have 30 different teams. I like to manage. I'm very hands-on. I like to have direct contact with individuals and set out a vision and then hold people accountable. And for me, that's what really being mayor is all about. I think people want answers to problems. I think they want someone who can help facilitate. So an ombudsman is about when there's a problem that needs fixing, systemic or otherwise, and folks don't feel that they're getting an ear or that they're getting results out of city government that they need, they feel like they should have that person that they can contact who isn't going to be caught down in the bowels of the bureaucracy, but is going to be at a high level, so they get answers and coordination and results, and if they can't get something, fine, they get that answer too. I mean, I think that's very, very important to cut through a bureaucracy sometimes that doesn't really feel that people are listening to it. Because I found that effectiveness of government is about two things. Of course, it's about results, but it's also about people feeling that they're being heard and they're getting results and they're getting a look-see. And I think that I see it now with late-night entertainment industry and how I've had to get involved personally and try and negotiate resolutions with ABC. We need someone in the mayor's office that is sitting there to help solve these problems at a time where it's very, very challenging for the arts and the entertainment industries and cultural institutions. And that's the kind of leadership and visibility I think that's important.
Thank you. Senator Yee.
Sure. What I see that person to do is to provide a good sounding board about needs within the diverse communities in San Francisco. One of the best examples is Cultural Center. Some groups have a cultural center, other groups don't have a cultural center. The question is, how do you get a cultural center? And in those kinds of questions that people ask, I, in a particular neighborhood, want to have a arts program of some sort. I want a street fair where my kids can go and see some art. And how come it's happening in one area, it's not happening in another? So you get these unevenness within our city, and people start scratching their head and say, well, what about us? And I think that that's part of the problem. I think there are some arts program that has a lot of money. Some art program don't have any money. Then how do you help each other so that both of them survive? And is that kind of inherent competition that we need to somehow work itself out so that the entire city is going to benefit from art, and all of our kids are going to benefit from our arts program.
So any more questions? We've got time for one more for this set of candidates. Yes.
I noticed that Clear Channel really has a lot of space to advertise to us, and it seems like I don't think they pay that much compared to what Clear Channel is. So is there a way that the mayors can help?
You only get one.
And then that's the other question. Why can't you guys work together?
Maybe with Frank Choice, we'll share.
Is there a way that maybe to set some, the space seems like it should be available to artists, you know, they get Clear Channel like that involved in supporting the artists that are working here in advertising, or it just seems like a good mixed advertising. It's all over our city and these kiosks and all that, way the more localized way.
I think, one thing that is going to require the next mayor, whoever he or she is, you're going to have to require a heck of a lot more collaboration on stuff, and talking to folks that are here about what they're willing, businesses that are doing business here in the city, kind of San Francisco, what they're willing to share, how they're willing to collaborate with nonprofits and individuals in the community, because we're going to have to be a lot more creative in city government with the federal and state government shifting more and more responsibilities. We're going to have to deal with a lot of things here locally, and to agree that we can put pressure on other entities to help them be promoters and collaborators to help us to provide and promote a vibrant cultural and artistic industry here that takes care of nonprofits and individual artists. I think that's something we need to pursue and make sure that you're using the leadership of city government to drive it.
I would absolutely agree with you that the city does not do enough to promote its local artists. I know you guys are all involved in art because that's your passion. That's what drives you, wakes you up every morning, and keeps you calm when you go to sleep. So I understand how important art is for you, but it's also important for us in the city to let everybody know about what extraordinary things you do. And so my interest would be to, for example, say to the San Francisco Travel, which is the now what we used to call the Visitors Bureau, that they ought to be sending out materials about come to San Francisco and see our local artists. Portland, Oregon, has a vibrant art community. Our city promotes it to no end, and people flock to Portland to see their artists. We ought to be doing that in San Francisco. It is extremely important that we tell people that don't just go to some major areas in the city, go to all the different neighborhoods, because that's where you're going to find some of these extraordinary local artists, and you're going to see extraordinary things that you're never going to see anywhere else.
At this point, I want to thank City Attorney Herrera and Senator Yee for joining us today. To move things right along, I want to introduce our next candidates. Former Supervisor Bevan Dufty and Assessor Ting.
Stop tweeting, okay? It's distracting. I'm sorry. I've seen so many messages about how Deborah Walker was hot in the suit. How can we focus on the issues at hand here? A minute left. Oh my God.
I want to welcome you to the San Francisco Arts Democratic Club. My name is Bevan Dufty. I am the Vice President of the Arts Democratic Club. And I'm going to be also introducing the first question to you. So one candidate will be able to answer the question for 5 minutes. There'll be a follow-up question from the other candidate, and then a rebuttal. And for the sake of time and your sanity, I'm going to truncate my question because Deborah was...
What if we use less time? If we bring it down from 5, could we have more exchange? Is that possible?
Is Deborah here?
If we could use less time, I mean, the tweets were basically saying the answers were too long, so if we could abbreviate them and then have a little more fun with each other.
Yeah, I think there's like a 40-minute,
So we'll try to be more brief and then we can have more fun.
and we just ate into your 5 right now.
Sorry,
Just kidding.
that's cool.
Just kidding. So I'll jump right into the question with respect to your time, so thank you very much for being here. Back in the 80s, the Cultural Centers and the Cultural Equity Grants Program were started because there were inequities at grants for the arts. And so in 2006, during the Arts Task Force, those same issues we found that were still affecting the arts community. And so the question that we have for you, what steps would you take as mayor to restructure the delivery of arts in San Francisco to deliver equal access to the arts for all communities across our city and a renewed effort to include the arts more successfully in our policy and plan?
Thank you. So as mayor, I would see being a culture-first mayor and having the opportunity in all things to be visible and vocal and engaged. And we live in an experience-based city. We live in a city that prides itself on diversity and cultural expression, and creating an element of excitement is, I think, the most important thing we can do. Certainly for young people who live here, they want to be able to, whether it's a club scene or museums, and I think that we've seen some great work on the part of our cultural institutions to make themselves relevant to young people and to bring young people in. I'm proud of the fact that I co-sponsored then Supervisor Amiano's landmark legislation, the Public Education Enrichment Fund. I was his first co-sponsor and worked diligently on it. And we have an arts master plan for our schools. And more than anything, arts and culture are a means to engage our young people and to take young people, no matter what their circumstance is or what their level of academic success may be recognized as, and to challenge them and to inspire them. For me, I see our arts as being integral to our economic development plan. Certainly with the absence of federal and state money for the arts, that we've become very reliant on the hotel tax. It's seen about a 20% hit there, as well as drying up the resources at other levels of government. And so I've led delegations. I've led an LGBT delegation of 34 gays and lesbians and heckling as a drag queen to Sydney, Australia 2 years ago, to really promote tourism coming to San Francisco, to bring LGBT tourists, to focus on our 23 sister city relationships, to look at those forms of cultural exchange. But we've got to fill up our hotel rooms and create that economic engine and that sense of urgency. I think that I have a reputation of having been probably one of the most active people in city government around the preservation of the club scene and all of its various forms, and recognizing that there are constantly issues that have to be worked out with neighbors and neighborhoods to make sure that clubs are good neighbors. But I think that we can definitely work with our police and the neighborhood to make it respectful. But the reality is that no one wants to live in a city that rolls up its sidewalks at 9 o'clock. And so the things that you've seen in Paris, where you have cultural institutions that are open all night, they call it Blanc Nuit, which would not be very popular here. White Night is something that was part of our history, and I wouldn't go back to that. But I think the notion of creating these great experiences that people enjoy. So why don't I stop there?
Sister Ting, you have 1 minute for a follow-up question?
Oh, for a follow-up question. And then I do
And then there'll be a rebuttal. You can answer the question.
Sure. Supervisor, what would you say is the proudest accomplishment during the time before that, in terms of your contribution to
That's a sweet question. Thank you, Phil. So for me, I was really interested in the GLBT Historical Society, which is located over the Cartoon Museum, and I'd go into audiences and 90% of the people had never been there. So it was very important to me that to make the Castro sustainable, we needed to anchor cultural institutions there. We've not been successful in getting theater there, but I have been successful in bringing back a museum space, which has a lot of events at it. And so when people come to the Castro, they can get more than a t-shirt and a sex toy. They can actually come and learn about Phyllis and Belle. They can learn about our community's history. Although t-shirts and sex toys are wonderful. I don't want to speak up for them.
Thank you very much. Sister Ting, the same question. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I'm fine, thanks, Ken. Well, it's great to be up here with Supervisor Dufty. You know, I think for too long, arts is been seen as a luxury in San Francisco, which it's not. We are now an innovation economy. We are an economy of very creative people. And creative people throughout history have challenged the current status quo, have challenged workplace norms, have challenged the way that we have traditionally do business. And whether it's a government, whether it's in a corporation, whether it is how we are structured societally, it's so important that we do everything possible to foster a creative class here in San Francisco. If you think about it, this innovation economy, that's the reason why we have a huge group of folks in digital media. It's probably one of the reasons Lucas decided to move from Marin to San Francisco. It's not a mistake that Zynga's here, or that Yelp is here, or that Twitter's here. It's because the same folks who may have been artists at one point decided to change careers are now working in digital media. It's that exact same backbone of the economy. In fact, I think we should look at arts in a completely different way. For too long, we have looked at arts like charity, like we hand out money to artists and they do things to enrich our culture. We should almost look at it, I'm a little, I don't know that we should be talking to bankers right now, but I think we should look at it like a civic return on investment. And if you look at what is a civic return on investment, if you look at the arts economy, the nonprofit and culture economy generate about $1 billion a year. For every $1 we put into arts, we get about $7 back. So why are we talking about that? Why are we talking about cutting arts when clearly the money we invest in arts returns us so much more? It's the same challenge to the cultural norm, which is why we started Reset San Francisco, which was really to say, hey, it's not, we don't want to run the same kind of campaign. We're trying to run a different campaign. In the campaign, I would just say earlier today, traditional campaigns is, you raise the most money, you get the most endorsements, you go get your base. That's sort of generally how campaigns have been won. Well, with this kind of field, with this kind of campaign candidacy, I think the rules are going to change. And with ranked choice voting and public financing, it's really unsure how everything's going to work out. So what we try to do is almost change the way the campaigns are going to be run. Just the same way I think artists and creative people have changed the way San Francisco is. It used to be, if you think about it, San Francisco was a corporate headquarters. People like me in suits would be working at AT&T or at AT&T/Pac Bell, Chevron, all these corporations that have now since moved out of San Francisco, yet the economy hasn't shrunk, it's grown. And it's grown because we've been able to bring in companies like Zynga, companies like Twitter, companies like Lucas, and really help grow this whole new economy. It's not that we're poor, we're actually richer, and we're actually better. And it's actually somewhat of a better fit because culturally, these folks don't want to be in Cupertino or Sunnyvale. They could choose to live there. They get the same job opportunities. Why are they living in San Francisco? 30% of Twitter likes to work. They are part of here because they want to be part of this creative economy and part of this creative culture.
1 minute follow-up question.
Great. Politics is personal, so I wondered if you could share a memorable concert that you went to as a high school or college student or a school play, or if you were in band. And then the second part of it is that if I were to op research myself for this forum, I would say the biggest reason to vote against me is how much Nickelodeon and Disney I watch having a child. And so you also have a 4-year-old, and I wonder how you reset your culture buddy.
Absolutely. I'll answer the last one first. The funny thing is, I answered in your questionnaire because the questionnaire asked, well, what arts have you done the last year? And I kind of scratched my head because everything, Bevan and I, we have daughters about 6 weeks apart, so we've gone through preschool and daycare together. And everything that I've done in the last, feels like a year, it's all about sort of Play-Doh and glue and sticks and paper and drawing. And I think it shows really the importance of how important art now is, more important even in my life, because I'm looking at it through her eyes and how her mind grows and how it expands and how it's absolutely amazing. I think in college, some of the most influential experiences during college that I went to were going to Asian American Theater Company plays and seeing these, at that time, fairly not well-known playwrights like David Henry Hall or Philip Kankotanda start plays and grow them, and really seeing how if there wasn't an Asian American Theater Company, how they would have never been to Broadway. It just wouldn't have happened. It was because of the money for the arts that was made a reality.
Well, thank you for that question. The next question is one about funding. I think you mentioned the recent study paid for by the task force report that substantiated the fact that $1 million is put into our economy each year just by the nonprofit arts. And the multiplier for the entire arts community is 3 to 4 times that when you add in all of the for-profit entities. So when you look at the fact that we've cut funding significantly because it's funded directly out of the hotel tax, and that's down, and the general fund contribution to the Arts Commission was cut, defunding cultural equity grants as well as cultural centers. And then you add that to the fact that the state and the federal funding is gone. There's no individual artist grants that used to be available at that level. What are your ideas for increasing the funding for the arts, for stabilizing our arts program, and for incorporating the arts in the discussion throughout other agencies? For instance, the America's Cup and our position that we need to have an arts component directly affecting the economic development, bringing people out to the neighborhoods through the arts. What are your thoughts about that? Let Assessor Ting go first, and we'll...
Great. Well, revenue is something I know a little bit about. And as assessor for the last 6 years, we've been able to bring in over $300 million more of revenue in working with very close to the tax collector's office. And it just shows that if we can make government work more efficiently, there is more revenue out there. The other thing that I think we have to look at much smarter tax policy. One of the things that I think the art community can do is join me in my quest to close a loophole in Prop 13. I mean, that is, to me, a huge source of funding that has caused the downfall of our education system and has really shattered a lot of our ability to fund many things that I think are absolutely critical to our society. We obviously need to go close the hotel tax loophole around the internet companies like Expedia, Orbitz. I think that's sort of very odd that you could get the same room next to each other and you pay 2 different taxes. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I think when people talk about that there's not revenue to be gotten, I think they're wrong. So I think there is more money out there. I think that obviously the number one way we can grow revenue is through jobs. It's clear that a critical part of growing our economy and growing jobs in San Francisco is maintaining this creative economy. We're an innovation economy. We can't go the way that Cupertino is going. I think Cupertino wants to go the way that we're going. I don't think you're going to see cities like Cupertino suddenly going to say, hey, we're looking to defund arts. We're probably trying to find ways to increase the funding for the arts. And I think we need to do the same thing. So I think this whole race to the bottom is not very smart, because the more we cut, obviously, the less we're going to get out of our economy. I think in terms of the America's Cup, I think just like with developments, I don't think we should have developments that are separate from art, or we should have America's Cup separate from art. If you look at when we hosted the World's Fair many years ago, much of the fair is actually torn down, but the World's Fair left something that stayed for over 100 years that is now iconic in San Francisco. I think if the America's Cup is going to bring in the money that we've predicted, which is billions of dollars, I think the America's Cup should leave behind something that is also iconic and that will contribute to San Francisco, not just this next year, but really for the next 100 years to come. I think, again, the most important point is we need to do a better job of actually defining how art does return our investment. We can't just say, oh, we paid money and we got this nice painting and this nice sculpture. I think we have to really drive and do a better job to say, how is arts really bringing in tax dollars, bringing in people, bringing in tourism. Honestly, if we didn't have art, I don't think tourists would come to San Francisco. That's part of one of the major attractions here, is that cannot be seen, again, as a luxury. It's got to be seen as a critical part of the economy, that if we took it away, that the economy would change. That the economy that we have in terms of digital media or life sciences or clean technology would not be there.
Thanks. About my pitch, I'm sorry. I wanted to talk a little bit more. Not everybody knows about split roll, and I think that is, you have shown tremendous leadership in articulating why that aspect of Prop 13 is really important.
Thanks, Bevan. So Prop 13 is somebody who implements Prop 13 every single day. We are subsidizing office buildings, the Westfield Mall, AT&T Ballpark, the same way we're subsidizing homeowners. And I think there's a very logical reason that no one should lose their home because of property tax. I think there's a very logical reason that for folks who are on fixed incomes, they should not be taxed out of their home or kicked out of their home because they don't have the ability to pay for an income tax. Now, I don't know why that same principle applies to the Westfield Mall or to Macy's or Saks Fifth Avenue or to the Bank of America building or to the Transamerica building. I think all of those properties who are actually making money should be taxed accordingly. It shouldn't get any sort of subsidy that we are giving to all homeowners. And if you look at it, by removing that subsidy, we could generate about $7 billion for the state of California. $7 billion. If you think about it, we have a $20 billion deficit. Just by doing that one thing, we can close that deficit in a third. So I think it's so important for us as we're thinking about ways, we don't want to get into this race for the bottom, where we're competing each other or fighting, the choices between art versus education versus public health versus muni. I think we have to look at, rethink and rework the ways that we're thinking about how we're bringing in the money and challenge that assumption.
And now you can answer that question.
Super, thank you. When I worked for Mayor Willie Brown and I was director of neighborhood services, he used to like to bring people together in sort of a collaborative, creative process. And one of the things he used to do was he'd have a once a month meeting of all the heads of the different neighborhood groups. And you could come in and you could have a wild hair about something, and you'd have your opportunity to get your moment in front of the mayor, and department heads would be there and so forth. And there was a tiny dynamo named Carmen Ramirez. I'm not even sure anybody here would recall her because she passed away some years ago. And she was a hellion, and she would, you would just go in and wonder if you would walk out with like all 10 fingers by the end of the discussion. But I think that more of that is useful, and I think that as a mayor, to make yourself accessible to the criticism. And so with initiatives like having artists in community agencies and looking at that, I think that there's a certain accountability factor that needs to be there, and not so much to just announce something by press release and then not have the opportunity to engage. And so I think that's something I'd really want to do is to have a monthly get-together where community cultural institutions, the big institutions, advocates, artists themselves could come and challenge us around things, because I have a lot of ideas. I pitched yesterday when we were at the Apapa debate in the Portola that I would like to bring first-run Chinese cinema to Portsmouth Square and have a screen there like we do in Dolores Park, and bring it to McLaren Park, which could be a basis of creating some cultural activity and focus there, and how fun that would be to kind of focus on what's our strength as a city with a dynamic Chinese American population, and to bring leading edge cinema in here and looking at how you look at Chinatown and think about bringing some modernity, because some of the greatest new architecture and energy is coming out of China, but yet still, Chinatown has to be sustainable, but I think that it can be more relevant to modern experience. I can tell you that one thing that I've not been afraid to do is to kind of shake folks down for the arts. So we had a situation when Hayes Valley, Bernal, Valencia Gardens was being rebuilt, and the Bufano sculptures were moved from Valencia Gardens to the Random Museum. And then when Valencia Gardens reopened, the the people, the parents that support them, we don't want to lose these sculptures. We'll know we had to lose those sculptures because they needed to go back because they were originally dedicated to Valencia Gardens. But what I did was I went to the PUC and said, why can't, you're doing all this work up in the hinterlands and we're not going to put public art there. Why don't we do something exciting and create public art for the Randall that educates us about the importance of water? And so that's going to be opening in the next few weeks, and I'm excited about that. I absolutely think that America's Cup ought to pony up. I went to see John Stone, the CEO of Wells Fargo this week, and it was fascinating to listen to how he was frustrated that America's Cup views the business stakeholders as ATMs, like they're just supposed to give money to America's Cup. And he's interested in doing things that are going to be more sustainable. He's interested in the major business sponsors being invited in to say, let's not have $1.2 billion come in like a torrent of rain and just wash through our sewer systems and not hold on, not capture that in cisterns, and to create, whether it's businesses or cultural institutions or supporting cultural institutions. Because, God knows I'd love to see somebody in topsiders, but after a certain point, you're going to want to go do something else. And so I think that that's a great opportunity. And I truly think that the people that we traditionally think of as the funders in this area are actually interested in doing that they want to do things that are meaningful. And I would love, as mayor, to facilitate some of those discussions with arts leaders like yourself, members of the club, cultural institutions, and let's sit down with the business community and figure out something creative so that after it's gone, the worst thing is you see these Olympics. Obviously the Olympics weren't great for Greece, right? So you want to do things that are actually going to be meaningful long term.
And do you have a follow-up?
Well, I was just going to ask you, you must have some favorite arts groups out there, and I was wondering why you support them, and then how in San Francisco would be different if it didn't exist?
Well, I just got to go Sunday, and I was a judge for the Gold Rush pageant, and it was a drag pageant, and it was at a space called Twin Space, so it was very fun. It was at Mission and 17, and so there were two young women that operate this space, and I kind of thought they were twins because they came up at a certain point. But I've got to say, I get to see a lot of drag as a gay politician, and I love it, and I think it's so powerful because without drag queens, we wouldn't have had the spark for our civil rights movement, whether it was at Compton's Cafeteria or at Stonewall. And so I'm really proud of that tradition, and I think it's really so important. You described us as having daughters. My daughter likes to be a boy all the time. And so I think it's really important that we remind ourselves that pushing the boundaries of gender and that's a very important political statement, and I think that it's still very relevant. And I just want to say that I'm really proud of what drag brings to politics and to our city. Obviously, Pinocchio's was here for many years, but I'm so in awe of what our drag personalities do in raising money for our community. But when Proposition 8 passed, Pollo Del Mar took to the streets and led one demonstration after another. It was unbelievable. We were marching in every direction. We weren't even sure what way we were going, and she did it all in heels. And so I have a picture of her that I've kept in my office. But just again, I think that that's a really wonderful thing that I'm so proud of.
Those are our prepared questions, and now we're going to ask anybody with questions for our candidates to come over here so we can get the questions on microphone. If you're shy, just bear with us. So, any questions? We had some from. These are 1 minute answers.
Okay.
Alma, yeah, go ahead. Do you want to come up here?
Probably need to, my voice is not very good.
Okay. And anybody else? Questions? Next now? We've got about 5 minutes.
I have to confess, this is especially for Mr. Ting, that I'm really mystified that Prop 13 is a problem, but not having Twitter and Lucas not pay taxes is not. Because that's why Lucas came. There's no city taxes in the Presidio. And I live a block from Twitter, and I would provide a lot of jobs in the city if you gave me $47 million, by the way. But there are people that refuse to pay their taxes. And then we cut the arts because nobody's paying taxes. there's something wrong with this economics.
You're absolutely right, and I think, the Presidio is, I don't know all the background with why the Presidio was, given that complete tax break. For all of you who don't know, any company in the Presidio does not pay any taxes, whatsoever. That was a deal they cut to make the Presidio more self-sufficient. You're right, I mean, our tax policy is turned up on its head. We have so many loopholes on the corporate side that we need to be closing. We actually have a loophole in our transfer taxes where banks that foreclose on people don't have to pay transfer taxes. So we have a ton of loopholes out there that we need to be closing. I think the Prop 13 one's one I've identified. We need to take a hard look at our vehicle license fee. Obviously, you've all heard of the oil extraction fee, where we're one of the only states in the country, including Alaska, which has an oil extraction fee that doesn't charge oil companies money to take oil out of the ground. So you're right. I think too often we are focused on this race to the bottom, where we are fighting over crumbs when we should really be stepping back and having a clear perspective about who's really paying and who's not. And frankly, for too long, our tax policy's been on the backs of middle-class families, working families, and that's really who it's paying. And I see that every single day in the assessor's office. So that's why I've spoken up, I think, about this very critical issue.
And how about you? What about Twitter getting a tax break and the arts funding getting cut?
Well, I think it's all how it shakes down, is that you can give a benefit. I do believe that right now, until we reform our business tax structure, that some of the incentives that we've given in biotechnology, clean technology, filming, and now Twitter are essential. We've had a departure of a lot of major businesses. Chevron is one example. Schwab has had a lot of jobs move out of the city, and I don't think we build our economy. Certainly small business is the economy of engine of choice in our city, but I think the reality is that we've got to have all levels of business here. And so when I say it's how it shakes down, is what is it that Twitter's going to do here? How are you creative with a major institution coming in and getting them to partner with community interests, with arts interests, with improvements to the pedestrian streetscape that make areas of our city more inviting? I just think that you have to constantly be engaged in the creative process. And if anything, having worked in government all my life, I'm always about how do you create an outcome that really is beneficial. And so I think that's where I want to be judged. Don't judge me by bringing the business here. Judge me by what that business does by virtue of being here.
Okay? Yes. Brenda Berlin?
Yes, hi. I just wanted, I just wanted to get your feedback on what you think about the idea of merging the Art Commission with Grants for the Arts. My take on it is that, and I've done the arts since 1965 here. I'm not doing it quite so much before, but I've seen so much division over the years. There's always been the haves and the have-nots. We have the money from Grants for the Arts, a lot of money that has gone to the arts groups, which is great. But then we have the Art Commission, which doesn't have a dime, practically, until we fought for the Cultural Equity Endowment. So what's your feeling about how we coordinate to make something happen, an agency that's vital, that can hold everybody accountable for making things happen in this city?
Phil first.
My last two jobs, one as assessor and the last one as the executive director of the Asian Law Caucus, I'm very familiar with looking at groups that need serious reform. Looking at the 2006 task force recommendations, I totally agree with them. Those two groups should be combined. They seem rather redundant. It seems rather redundant to have two groups that have similar missions or trying to do similar things. And frankly, the only reason it hasn't happened is probably because of a lack of leadership and a lack of attention, frankly. And again, I think it goes back to this whole point of people perceive arts as a nice to have, not as a have to have. My feeling is that if you look at art, the reason that San Francisco is an innovation economy is central to our cultural and our art institutions. We wouldn't be innovating if we didn't have creative people. That's the core of what an innovation economy has. And creative people aren't just artists, right? They could be people who are scientists. They could be people who are graphic designers. They could be people who are in theater, any type of work that really is out there pushing the envelope. For me, I think those two groups should definitely be created, combined. We need to make things much more efficient. That's why I'm talking about this whole idea of having a civic return on investment. I don't think art should go around begging for money. I think it's imperative on us and all forms of government to demonstrate what the value is of the money we're putting into everything. I think arts is just one more thing we have to demonstrate what is the value. Now, the task force talked about the $1 billion. I think we have to go make that a number that is hard and something that we can convince economists to accept and prove to the board, prove to the rest of the city that there really is money to be got from arts, and that it isn't just something that's nice to have and that it will generate only just more tourists in an ancillary environment. But if you take, again, I think we have to do is you have to imagine, what if San Francisco didn't have this funding? What would San Francisco look like? What would it look like? And would we want to live in that city? And would that city also generate the same kind of economic return that we do today? I don't think so.
Thank you. 2 minutes on this one.
Okay, thank you. I just want to reflect for a moment that a couple years ago, one of my then colleagues on the Board of Supervisors offered a last-minute amendment on the day that the budget was before the Board of Supervisors. I think the amount was $800,000 that was being cut from grants for the arts, and it was aimed specifically in the language at the symphony, the opera, the ballet, and I think ACT, which seemed odd because it wasn't a big donor. Now that money was actually being moved into violence prevention, but ultimately it was determined that you couldn't effectuate that type of cut, and what wound up happening was an across-the-board cut, which added another 5% reduction to arts agencies, and I believe at least one or more agencies really made a decision to shut their doors based upon that. And so I just want to say that what's important to me is not to pit community-based institutions against the larger institutions. We need both in San Francisco, and I don't think that the question begs that that necessarily is a dynamic. But what I would do as mayor is to bring us together, and let's focus on some things that we could do together and sort of see what the dynamism and what the creative connection is. So rather than putting the bureaucracy and saying, okay, we should move these two together, and people get uptight and they're kind of worried because they sort of know how to work one side of the street or another, why don't we focus on what the major issues are? And for me, those issues are about young people. Let's be real about it. We have a lot of young people that live in our public housing developments. And why can't we create life campuses there that bring in our educational institutions and our arts institutions to stimulate and challenge young people around art, whether it's rap, whether it's whether it's design, whatever that might be. And that, because I want public housing to be the best housing we have in San Francisco. So bringing those institutions together to partner in that area. America's Cup is another example. Both sides of the street would want to see more support for the arts, so why not plan together? And if we can do that, maybe we can create sort of the shared support for this. Because for me, it's about the stakeholders. I don't want to go through process fights in this town that take us away from what I see to be the real issues. And for me, it's getting the Ruth Avalos School for the Arts in Civic Center. That's something that we've got to do. I've made a promise to that, and that's something that we should do to tap into what we have at Civic Center and to have an art high school that's the envy of the country. And let me tell you, that's not about individual students who are already academically successful. It's about changing the way we deliver arts education throughout San Francisco and really creating something that I think stimulates equity for students from backgrounds who have not succeeded in our public education environment.
So that's all we have time for. Candidates, I want to thank you again for coming and speaking with the community. And we will be seeing you on the campaign trail, I'm sure.
You're coming back soon, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very true. Thank you very much. And now we have, for our final debate pairing, we have supervisors, David Chiu and John Avalos, who have just come from their Board of Supervisors meeting. They've been working hard all day for us. And we're going to turn you over to Vinay Patel for the first question. If you want to flip over to those first, somebody call it. You can flip it.
I'm flipping your call. Head baby.
You got it. So, you want to go first? You get to choose.
Yeah, I'll have John go first, just so I can
Democratic Club. In the interest of time, I'm going to truncate this first question. Back in the 1980s, San Francisco began our Cultural Center program and a Cultural Equity Grants program in response to inequities found to funding from grants for the arts to the culture diverse communities in San Francisco. Fast forward to 2006, an arts task force was formed in San Francisco, and again, those same inequities were found in 2006. So our question to you is, what steps would you take as mayor to restructure the delivery of arts in San Francisco to deliver equal access to the arts for all communities across our city, and a renewed effort to include the arts more successfully in our policy and planning? You have 5 minutes to answer the question, followed by a follow-up question from the other candidate, and then a follow-up. So I'm not one to pause.
I think I'm going first, right? So
Yeah, and it was a very spirited debate before. People were, throwing punches, so feel free to.
So 5, 1, and 2, and then 5, 1.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the question. Let me just go back about how I came to San Francisco. I got here in 1989, and I got here without much means. I had $1,000 in my pocket. I knew about 3 people in San Francisco, but I was really drawn by this city, its creativity and its history, the beat culture, the rock and roll culture, Haight-Ashbury, all of that was what drew me here. I always saw it as a place of great creativity and a place where you can actually invent and reinvent yourself. And I think that's the draw of San Francisco for a lot of people, which is really exciting. And I think that's the idea of this city for people, not just in this country, but all over the world, and why I think people want to come here. When I was running for supervisor in District 11, I was knocking on a lot of doors, and I was really amazed at how many people I saw in that district who were artists, sculptors, painters, photographers, writers, poets, musicians, people who made their own instruments. And what we saw about my district, District 11, it's the Excelsior District, it's the Lakeview neighborhood, proper Amazon, it's the south central part of San Francisco. Not very well known for having a lot of artists. And it's kind of viewed as a bedroom community for a lot of people in the city. People actually do their artwork or do their work outside the district. They come home and they go back to the district. Well, from that experience of meeting so many people, it seemed to me that we need to be able to create our own grassroots-based arts programming in the district. And you can talk about restructuring San Francisco and making sure you have equity in their arts programming all over the city, but if you're not fostering, people making connections at the local level, the neighborhood level, you can try and make plans, but you're not going to be able to bring people forward to access funding for the arts programs that the city can provide. So I think one thing that people need to do is be able to look at how we can foster just the connections of artists that actually are out there and have come to San Francisco in the communities. Then you can overlay that, the structures of the city. We have, I reviewed the Arts Task Force report, and I actually was briefed on it back in 2006. It was very meaningful to me. And one of the things that, one of the recommendations that have come out of that is combining the Arts Commission with grants for the arts, the Film Commission, and looking at how to have a layer of Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I believe that's the right way to go. Arts are an economic engine. If it's an attraction for people coming to San Francisco, it's also a way that we can stimulate the economy. And so I've looked at, I think as mayor, I want to bring those institutions together and think about how we can realign how we do with funding so we can support the neighborhood artists, the organizations that provide neighborhood arts all across San Francisco. And we need to help, local supervisors and local neighbors and residents to be able to foster the arts within their communities. And I think it's a dual process, structuring government on one side, but also making sure we can recognize the great talents that we have in San Francisco on the other. I've seen the difference that arts have made in the communities. There's a young man I know named Anthony Lopez, who was a tagger and a poet, and he was a great artist and he was a great poet, but he didn't have any support really to get to the next level. And if there was an organization like Out-of-Sight Youth Arts that existed in District 11 back in the day, he probably could have made a better go of his life. On the other hand, another neighbor of mine, Eric Norberg, who's a great muralist, and he was a tagger as well, and he was a poet as well. He had access through his family to through Brasida Eyes and their programming. And he had greater privileges that way to get that. He's an internationally known artist. So we need to be thinking about how we can foster support for young artists all across the city. I think restructuring the Arts Commission, combining these programming together and looking at how we can really nurture neighborhood arts is definitely the way to go. We also need to recognize that there are different institutions, art institutions in the city. You have major institutions like the symphony, the opera, and they do provide great catalysts for arts and learning. And they need to be have a part of what the pie is. But I want to make sure that we're also providing real strong funding for the organizations and the individual artists that are a big part of the drive to this city. And I think if we're actually going to be able to foster, I've actually sponsored 4 neighborhood art walk events in my district without any city funding. We've done all through volunteers. If we're going to be able to foster greater commercial development in our neighborhood commercial corridors, we have to be able to look at how we can do that through supporting our neighborhood artists. They're a big draw to our commercial corridors. We've had our art walk events having combined youth arts, arts from seniors, poets, musicians, and they've been very, very successful events. We should be able to have those things as ongoing events that continue for lengths of time, long enough we've been able to do it so far. And I'm very proud of that work, and I think that the city has a lot to offer in terms of ensuring that we have a vibrant program.
Thank you. Supervisor Chiu, a follow-up question for Supervisor Alvarez.
First of all, I just want to thank you for having us here tonight and for taking part in this discussion about the future of artists and the arts in San Francisco. And I should probably also start off by saying that John and I, over the last few years, we've had a number of conversations about what we want to see for this community. And I think we share an awful lot as far as what vision we have for the role that arts has in San Francisco. And I think we probably have spent the most time of all the candidates thinking about this. So, easy question for John. What would be the first thing that you would want to do as mayor to move forward an arts agenda in San Francisco?
Well, I probably convene hopefully, I know there's a lot of members of the Arts Task Force are still around, and probably bring them back into the room to look at how we can start enacting some of the recommendations that come out of the task force. Probably looking at also the structure within the Arts Commission and grants for the arts. Just in reviewing the task force recommendations, I was looking at, well, is this going to take a charter amendment? I think it might take a charter amendment to combine some of these functions. There was a recommendation I've heard about adding the library commission as well, and I'm not sure that's a charter mandated function. So how we can look at legally what we need to do to be able to combine these functions. But I think pulling together the Arts Task Force members who I believe whose voices had not been adequately heard by the mayor's office, bringing them in to ensure that they are adequately heard, that we can enact the recommendations that they have that will provide a lot of support for artists and organizations that do art and neighborhoods that are in vital need of art. And we can attract ways of stimulating our economy, bring in new tourism with our arts programming. These are all the things that I would like to do to initiate my work as mayor of San Francisco.
Thank you, Supervisor Alvarez. Supervisor Chiu, same question. Would you like me to repeat the question?
I think I got it. So again, thank you for having us here tonight. And let me start by talking about my own personal connection to the arts. And someone here asked me the question of whether it's true if I have been cited playing the electric violin on the stage of the Red Devil Lounge. And the answer to that, I guess if you Google it, apparently it does come up. It is true. From when I was in 3rd grade for almost a decade, I was a musician. My dad, who immigrated, actually the first kid in my family born here in the United States, handed me a violin when I was in 3rd grade. It was a tiny little violin, which I played for the next 12 years or so. And I played the piano, the cello, and the violin. And through much of my high school years and my early college years, played in pit orchestras, in weddings, in symphonies, in various gigs. And to be perfectly honest, if I had been a little better at the violin, I probably would not be sitting here in front of you as an elected official. Music has been an incredibly important part of my life. I know actually it's an important part of John's life as well. And to me, the arts in San Francisco is not just about supporting a community of individuals who are artists. I think our city, I think every great city, needs to have at its heart a commitment to the arts because it's important for economic development. It's important for attracting tourists. It's important for cultivating our next generation of young kids, making sure that we're investing in arts education so that we are pushing the creativity of our next generation. It's important for public safety. When we have beautiful spaces, studies show that crime diminishes, just as when there are broken windows, we know that crime increases. Every facet of our city can be affected by the arts. And so I think this conversation is really not just about, in my mind, sort of a narrow segment of a population or a narrow set of issues. It's really, how do we ensure that this is a set of values that really inculcates throughout the entire city? The next question, I think, touches on a number of things, which I will talk about. I think we all understand and agree that in recent years, funding to our artists and the opportunity for artists to actually live here in San Francisco has gotten much, much more difficult because of, I think, bad or misguided policy decisions. So, for example, Vinay talked about the cultural centers and cultural grants. And we know in recent years, our cultural centers have been whacked from a budget standpoint. And in fact, several months ago, a number of folks from this room came to my office and said that the API and queer cultural centers had received zero funding. And this is why I put in the one add back into this year's budget process to make sure that we provided some level of funding back to those institutions. We have known in recent years that the percentage of grants that San Francisco provides to local artists has been diminishing. In my first year in office, I actually asked this question of Luis Cancel. He didn't exactly know the answer. I asked him again. At a second hearing, he said, probably in the 20s or 30s. And I said, wait a second. 20-30% of our city's grants are awarded to our local artists. The rest of these grants go to what he referred to as the national artists, the international artists. And he really fought any suggestion that we needed to think about providing grants to our local talented artists. I asked him a lot of questions, might have embarrassed him a little bit on the pages of the Examiner and the Chronicle. And lo and behold, when he came in front of the Budget Committee this year, that number is up in the 60s. But as I said at that hearing, I'm really proud, Mr. Cancel, that your numbers are up in the 60s. What are we going to do to keep it there? And I suggested, and I think something we may want to think about, is just as last year we passed a piece of legislation that John co-sponsored, that John championed, that I helped to co-sponsor around local hiring, I think we need to consider some sort of policy where we provide our local artists with some percentage of the grants that we have. I think that's only fair. Now, to touch upon a couple other aspects of your question, I am absolutely in favor of merging the San Francisco Arts Commission and Grants for the Arts. We need one unified office. We have a huge bureaucracy in San Francisco in every part of government. 15 departments that regulate the business community, 14 workforce development programs, 3 child care agencies, and 2 arts agencies. And we need to merge these things so that we can really focus and figure out what our priorities are. And I think there are many things that such an office should do. We need to make sure we're coordinating with other departments. We need to make sure that we're working with diverse communities. We need to make sure we're fostering economic development. And we need to make sure that our artists are being taken care of. And apparently my time is up, but I look forward to continuing that conversation.
Supervisor Avalos, follow-up question?
Just what would you do to assure that neighborhood artists are getting the support they need to be able to do their work?
I think we have to think about arts in our neighborhoods. So whether this be, for example, making sure that we have a neighborhood-based arts program that has artisan residences at different facilities, whether it be making sure that we're expanding our cultural centers to house artists here and to make sure that folks know that this is a center and a hub, not just where artists reside, but where we can educate the next generation in arts, whether it be moving forward a program that I've been an early champion of, which is Art in the Storefront, using vacant storefronts in difficult merchant corridors, freeing them up for artists. This is something that has worked extremely well in a number of more challenged neighborhoods in San Francisco, something I completely support. I think that the vision that we have right now, for example, in the Mid-Market Tenderloin area is a fascinating one, and one that I support. We are trying to attract innovation and artists. We are bringing in Twitter and Burning Man to bring in that creativity in the business and technological fields, along with the creativity of the arts. These types of synergies on top of each other, in my mind, this is what cities are really wonderful at. And this is something that I would be very interested in helping to cultivate. In my time as a district supervisor, I represent the northeast part of the city. We have moved forward with a number of programs to really cultivate neighborhood-based art. So whether it be, for example, Arts in the Alleyway in the heart of Chinatown, where we have some of the most interesting and some of the oldest alleyways in the city, whether it be the Lower Polk Art Walk that I helped to sponsor last Thursday night on Polk Street, a street that has a tremendously rich history. There are now murals on most blocks in Polk Street. We're trying to capture some of what the Mission has been able to do with their mural program to bring that to another part of town where we are attracting more and more folks. Again, this is good for community, it's good for public safety, it's good for economic development. There are so many things we do when we allow arts to flourish in our neighborhoods.
Thank you for that question. The next question that we're asking is regarding the financial commitment to the arts. The Arts Task Force actually funded a study that looked at nonprofit sector and established the economic development, the economic stimulus that occurred just from our nonprofit sector. And the statistics show $1 billion in economic activity every year just from the nonprofit sector. That's an 8-time return on our money. If you add the for-profit arts, it's thought to be $3 to $4 billion per year. And yet we continue to cut arts funding, especially neighborhood arts. And as you mentioned, cultural space support has diminished. The state and federal funding for arts programming, as well as individual artists, has all been taken away. What steps would you take to increase and secure funding for the arts in San Francisco, including funding for arts-based development? Would you support increasing and expanding our existing Art on Site program to both cover citywide large development as well as other activities, including not just Art on Site, but programming and art space? And will you support an arts component of America's Cup and those type of events? The arts community believes that those events require a commitment to arts activity in them. So these are all issues about your ideas for revenue. Maybe Supervisor Chiu, can you start, and then we'll do a follow-up from John and reverse it.
Great, thank you, Deborah. So this is a complete coincidence, but today I introduced a piece of legislation that addresses this very topic that has come out of probably months and months of conversations that Deborah and Vinay and others have had with the Arts Commission around the fees that are currently spent in downtown, mostly office buildings. So probably a couple years ago, I was walking through an office building and I noticed an amazing piece of art, and I asked questions about how it got funded, and I discovered that our city actually requires large developers, owners of big buildings, as they're being built, to devote 1% of the construction costs of a big building to on-site arts. And as you can imagine, this is often a lot of money. And this money is usually used to purchase a very expensive, incredible piece of art that sits in the middle of a private lobby, so that many of us actually don't have an opportunity to go see it. And so there are a lot of folks, I think a number of folks in this room, who thought, well, why don't we think about trying to access these resources in different ways. And so I introduced a piece of legislation today that is also being sponsored by Mayor Lee that would give developers and builders the opportunity to decide whether they wanted to take that 1% of money and provide it to either off-site art or to provide it to community-based organizations that are doing capital improvements. use. It's a choice of the developer or the owner of these buildings. It's estimated that over the next 10 years, this 1% fee could generate literally tens of millions of dollars. So for example, if you know about the Transbay Terminal project, there's a $3.3 to $4 billion development plan that is underway that would generate $30 to $40 million for the arts. If you had a single $100 million development, which is say 200 units of housing or an office building, that could generate $1 million. And what we're also going to allow is for the money to be used not just in the downtown area, but anywhere close to sort of this downtown corridor in the mid-market area, Tenderloin area, etc. And it is my hope that some of this money, assuming this legislation passed, will be freed up to support organizations and artists that are local, so that it's not just about that one magnificent piece of art in the middle of that financial district building, and it's about really pushing and cultivating artistry in the area. I want to also address another aspect of Deborah's question around the America's Cup. I was very proud to be a strong sponsor of the America's Cup, along with my colleague Rosemary Cramey and with our former mayor. And one of the things that is an obvious benefit of that project is it's going to bring in $1 billion plus into San Francisco. And this is money that hopefully is going to go not just to hotels and to bars and restaurants, but to local artists. And I am a believer that when it comes to public projects, there's a different requirement that requires us to place 2% of these fees into public art. And I think that fee, that requirement should apply to major construction projects related to the America's Cup. We have an opportunity with the America's Cup not only to rebuild our waterfront, to rebuild transit along the waterfront, but to rebuild how that part of town interacts with artists. And I think not only should we consider the use of that money there, but I think we need to consider programming arts in a very significant way into the America's Cup experience. And in fact, actually, I think at Deborah's suggestion, I asked that very question of the America's Cup organizers at a Board of Supervisors hearing just a couple of weeks ago. We were told that they are thinking about programming, but I think it's up to us on the board and for all of us in the community to push them on what this is going to mean, to make sure that there are going to be outdoor music and live performances, to make sure that there will be at least temporary public art installations. I am a big fan when the day is beautiful of having outdoor galleries. If you go to great cities like Sydney, you'll just have blocks and blocks of artists displaying their works near places where you literally will have, when the America's Cup comes, you will literally have 250,000 people coming to San Francisco a day. And this is a huge boon and opportunity for all of us in this room to enjoy. And again, it's not just about the artists, but it's also about cultivating the community that is coming to what I think of as the most beautiful city in the world, the city of San Francisco. A city with the most beautiful bay in the world. And there's no reason why we should not integrate an artistic experience as part of that, so that tourists will never forget the experience and will buy our art and spend a lot of money.
Question for him?
A follow-up question.
Sure, so just other ideas for revenue. What about how you want to restructure the hotel tax, or use the hotel tax to be able to fund arts?
Yeah, as I think many folks here know, our hotel tax has essentially been gutted in recent years as monies have been taken away from arts programs to other general fund uses. And I know that both John and I actually have a number of ideas in what we need to do to really shore up our revenues so that we're not necessarily robbing from Peter to pay Paul. A couple of ideas that I think I heard Bevan and Phil talk about. I have for years been a proponent of reforming our city's business tax. Right now, only 10% of all businesses in San Francisco pay this tax, and it's a tax that penalizes the creation of jobs. And so from my perspective, and I've been talking about this ever since I ran a small business here in San Francisco, I think we need to reform that tax and broaden the tax base so that we can ask all of our businesses that benefit from San Francisco to help pay just a little bit to make sure that we're all here. I also have been a very strong advocate for increasing the vehicle license fee back to the rates at which we used to pay the vehicle license fee before Governor Schwarzenegger gutted that fee in 2003. Californians used to pay a 2% fee for your vehicle for 50 years. And when Arnold Schwarzenegger came in, he blew a $6 billion a year hole in the state budget, which resulted in a $50 million plus hole in our local budget. Think of what that could do to us here locally. We have a state senator, Mark Leno, who's working to push legislation to allow us locally to consider fees like that. But we have to be creative in how we find revenues in these tough times, and we have to make sure that it is not our most vulnerable, and it's not the folks who are building vision for San Francisco that are shouldering the responsibility of budget cuts.
Thank you. Supervisor Avalos, to repeat the question, what steps would you take to increase and secure funding for the arts, including funding for arts-based development? Would you support increasing and expanding the arts development impact fee on new large developments to fund art spaces and public art programming? And also, will you support an arts component of the America's Cup? Our commitment and our belief is that it is a requirement as a public development that those projects pay a 2% arts mitigation fee. So you have 5 minutes, follow up with one, and then a
Great, thank you.
minutes to provide.
So the arts are really important to me, so I would be, in the past several years, I've funded many arts programming through the city budget. And the first year was 2006, based on the Arts Task Force recommendations, and funded our cultural equity centers, as well as our cultural equity grants, cultural centers and cultural equity grants. And for me, it was pretty devastating looking at how the hotel tax had been shifted, the use of the hotel tax, 14%, hotel tax is 14%, had been shifted from 8% that was going towards arts and the Convention and Visitors Bureau to 6%. And that shift meant that a lot of organizations and artists were not getting the support that they truly needed to be able to do their work. And so based on the task force recommendations, was able to put a little money back in the budget. It was a significant amount. I believe it was $800,000 to $1 million that went in that year. And I was very proud of doing that. And that's just a drop in the bucket, though, what the arts programming really, really needs. My work at City Hall has been chiefly on the city budget. The first day I got there was looking at how we could grow our budget pie, make it bigger, our revenue. And so I looked at the gross receipts tax. One of the first things I looked at was how we could move from a payroll tax to a gross receipts tax and have that become revenue generating. And I actually worked with David Chiu. I met David Chiu. We were working on that project years ago. We didn't quite get to the end of the line because it got shoved out of the way by other priorities. Last year I worked with unions, neighborhood leaders, and organizations to put a temporary 2% increase in the hotel tax on the ballot. That was going to go towards neighborhood services, but there were allocations that are specific to how the hotel tax should be used. It was all going to be in compliance with the hotel tax. We didn't win, and it was unfortunate. We actually had, Gavin Newsom had put up a competing measure, but I think in that competing measure that was specific to trying to close the loophole on online travel companies is the answer to get more significant online funding. Right now, the online travel companies like Expedia and Kayak are not paying into the hotel tax. They're in litigation right now. So once we win that litigation, which hopefully will happen next year, I've actually introduced a request for legislation that we would move forward and dedicate that funding, about $15 million a year, towards parks and for neighborhood arts as well. And to me, that would be a significant boom, but not enough. Then we're looking at our impact fees for construction, the 1% impact fee. I'd like to see that increase, and I support President Chiu's efforts around that as well. I think it makes a lot of sense. We also need to make sure that we are following the letter of the law on Admin Code 3.19, which is the 2% use of our development fees. The PUC actually I've been talking with the PUC about how we can use those funds, and they're looking more closely at how they can support neighborhood artists and working closely with city supervisors to make sure that money is programmed to support neighborhood arts. They actually they supported the Buddha that was outside of Civic Center. I'd love looking at the Buddha, but that wasn't necessarily supporting the neighborhood artists that really need it. I love the Buddha. And how do you like my Buddha? That's from Kankizia. So I want to make sure that we can actually use Admin Code 3.19 to really support neighborhood artists and make that go forward. America's Cup, we have over $1 billion coming in to San Francisco. We need to make sure that every development dollar that comes in, if we're building infrastructure, that we're going to be following that 2%. But also how we can actually, America's Cup is going to be an event that's going to happen during the day. I don't think you sail at night. It might be kind of dangerous, especially if you have grants flipping over. So at night, what are people going to do? People are coming to San Francisco. How can we couple the great increase of people visiting San Francisco with activities that are going to happen at night? There's been talk about having an International Arts Festival to come with America's Cup. I think that's good, but we need to be making sure that we're supporting our local artists as well. So I want to make sure that we can use the revenue that's coming in to help really stimulate that economy, to help bring in more tourists, and help really to support the folks who are really making San Francisco a dynamic cultural city that really is.
Do you have a follow-up question for the supervisor?
One question we were all asked in our questionnaire, and I'm curious to know what John thinks, is this topic around the San Francisco Arts Commission and grants for the art, and whether we should combine them, because I have a feeling many of us probably think we should, or do something like that, and I'm just curious your perspective on that.
I believe that we should combine them. I want to make sure that we can have a unified vision for our arts programming in the city and how arts are funded in the city. And I think the task force recommendations speak very clearly that we have a fragmented system. There's a lot of redundancy, and that we could actually vastly improve what we can do as a city by uniting those two departments together. Also combining that with, I would believe, the Film Commission as well. I want to be able to sponsor great films in San Francisco. How about doing a remake of Vertigo for the 21st century? I think you can actually go to a lot of the same places that are still around in that movie, and you can show off what a great city that San Francisco is. You can stimulate a lot of great tourism to come to the city, and it'll be a lot of fun. And I think having a group of folks, ideas to come forward to look at how we can really turn our great creativity into new projects and reinvent this city as something new would be excellent to do by working at combining these departments together. I actually also like the idea of looking at our parks programming as well, how our parks will be integrated into that system. I live right next to McLaren Park. We have the Jerry Garcia Amphitheater. That amphitheater used to be an amphitheater that used to have all the incredible bands in the 60s. I think Jimi Hendrix played there at one point. Has incredible sound. Nothing happens there. There should be a series that goes on there. Maybe a mini series at Stern Grove. We could have something at McLaren Park. What we have is Jerry Day, which is going to happen in a couple days. It's actually a pretty good event, but we can do so much more there. So how can we use our public space, our parks, our civic center plazas, our places all over the city to be able to attract and create series of arts as well? And I think if we're going to be able to take away the redundancies and make more efficient our arts programming through combining our departments, we're going to have more money freed up to be able to do these types of events.
That's great. Those are our prepared questions, and now we're going to again ask anyone in the audience to do any follow-up questions, any other questions, anything related to arts or anything that has been proposed tonight. So any questions? Yes. Vinay.
Thank you very much, supervisors. I have a question. Just recently, our former director of the San Francisco Arts Commission unceremoniously stepped down to go back home to New York. And that was after an exhaustive national search to find a director for the Arts Commission. Though the mayor does not necessarily choose the director of the Arts Commission, they do have an influence on who that could be. What qualities or qualifications do you think someone like the director of Cultural Affairs at the Arts Commission should have?
Well, obviously a passion for the arts and a passion and connections to artists, in San Francisco, understanding of what we need to do to stimulate the arts at the local level with at the private level, in the private sector as well. I think someone who's going to be able to look at how to integrate our our different departments together to do more streamlined funding. Someone who's going to have integrity and is not going to be squirreling away our precious resources for personal advantage. Clearly, we need to have a strong character in the person who's going to be in that position. And most of all, I think someone who can work with various city departments to assure that as we're doing development in our city departments, that we're going to be using our development dollars to be able to stimulate the arts and making sure we're using every dollar that should be available for that as well. So someone who's really good at budgeting, someone who's very collaborative working with our city departments.
I certainly agree with all the qualifications that John laid out. I think also for me, someone who has a real understanding of what good community-based arts programs look like, how do we foster arts at the neighborhood level, at the street level, how do we nurture a real arts education program for young people and incorporate that with their schools, and then also someone who understands the role that the arts has in economic development and being able to work with other aspects of city government that are thinking about workforce development, that are thinking about how to use the arts in large development projects, as we talked about, how to think about arts programming and arts events in a way that's going to bring in these international arts festivals and draw in tourists so that San Francisco becomes that premier #1 destination in a lot of different areas that folks want to visit because you have to go visit this installation or this particular festival. Those are a couple other things I'd be looking for, as well as someone I think who's good at working with the very diverse communities that we have in San Francisco, as we've alluded to before. Clearly we have some amazing established institutions, whether it be the ballet, the opera, the symphony, but we've got to do better than that. We want to pull folks out here to this cultural center. We want to pull folks out to the Bayview. We want to pull folks to the Mission, to Chinatown, to other parts of our city that they otherwise would not be attracted to. And I think someone who understands how to take advantage of our diversity and use it as a strength is someone who I'd like to support.
Great. Any other questions from, yes, come on up here. Thank you.
Hey, so there are a lot of artists that are willing to struggle financially in order to create and still exist in this city. And so one of the issues, and I don't know if you talked about this, I came in kind of late, but one of the issues that seems to be on the table when you're talking about artists and supporting art is there going to be healthcare for them through Healthy San Francisco, and how does that support people? It takes a load off of my mind as someone who also considers herself an artist and struggling to have Healthy San Francisco there to support me. And then also affordable housing. So to me, those are all parts of the puzzle for talking about arts and supporting the arts, is how do you, like the creative underbelly is oftentimes struggling when it comes to artists, so how do we afford to live here and have our basic well-being taken care of?
Supervisor Avalos first, and then...
Sure. There's this house on Geneva and Vienna. It's like this boarded up little house and no one's ever using it. I'd like to attract a few artists to take that place over and make it new. I think that's one way that we can use the great talents of our artists, is not necessarily call it squatting, but there's a lot of blighted properties that we can turn around into incredible cultural features of our neighborhoods. I'd like to think of a way we can make that happen. Affordable housing is a huge issue. It affects clearly the artist community, but so many other communities as well. I think a great feature of our housing policies that would support the artist community is our community land trust ideas. We've actually been able to convert a couple buildings in San Francisco to be co-op ownership housing. We've been able to turn over apartments to former tenants to be able to create their own housing opportunities. There's one in Columbus, it's called the Roots Program. So I think looking at alternative housing models might be useful, especially for the artist community, to help make that happen. I've also been working on making sure that we have funding for subsidies to support people who are struggling with rent, and maybe as an artist in residence program, we can actually have a program just specific for artists. The other part of your question was housing and healthcare. I was actually a big proponent and organizer to help make the Healthy San Francisco program happen through the healthcare security ordinance. And I would want to make sure that we can extend it to be a truly universal healthcare program. And in fact, it is. It's based on your income under $500,000, 500% of the poverty line, you're able to access the program. We need to make sure it's well funded. And it's something that I've cared a lot about as chair of the budget committee over the years, to make sure that we have as robust healthcare program as we can have. I want to close the loopholes on businesses as well that are not necessarily providing their full share of funding through the healthcare security accounts, the healthcare accounts that are not being utilized as effectively by workers. I think a lot of the workers who work in restaurants are also artists, so there's a big combination there.
I think your question touches on one of the biggest challenges facing our city that the next mayor has to tackle, which is not just about artists. It's about the fact that our city has become a city for the very wealthy. And over the past decade, we have lost thousands of working families. We have had thousands of tenants who've been evicted or homeowners who've been foreclosed upon. We've literally lost almost half of our African American population. And we certainly have lost probably thousands of struggling artists who've had to move out of town. And you pointed to of the biggest reasons why this is happening: cost of housing and issues around healthcare. Regarding housing, I am one of the tenants in this race. I've been a tenant for the entire time I've been in San Francisco, and I think both John and I share the perspective that folks who may not own the nice homes here, everyone is at risk that someday they could be evicted or foreclosed upon and may have to move. And so this is why I have championed many pieces of affordable housing legislation. The Roots program that John mentioned in Chinatown is a way for low-income individuals to actually own a stake of a home in an expensive area. The concept is you allow a nonprofit organization to essentially own land, but you own essentially a fractional unit of the building that you're in. You're not allowed to speculate with it, but you own it. There are many other things that I think we should do that are similar to that. I've helped to author legislation to expand affordable housing for homeless veterans, for seniors, for folks who want to protect our inclusionary housing requirements, which are the requirements that allow folks to live in more moderate income housing. We need to do more, and I certainly believe that we've got to figure out creative financing mechanisms to assist our teachers, our struggling families, our restaurant workers, and our artists. On healthcare, obviously, I think one of the most amazing things about San Francisco is that we were the first city to support universal healthcare. I'm a big proponent of Healthy San Francisco, and we need to make sure it's fully funded.
We will take one more question if there is one. Before I do that, I also want to say that if you want to join tonight, and in fact, you must join tonight if you want to vote on our endorsement process. August 11th, which is a Saturday, we are going to be meeting, or is it the Sunday? Excuse me. What?
August 15th.
August 15th is our endorsement, but we also have at the beginning of August, the 7th, excuse me, we have our PAC, all-day PAC meeting where we'll be interviewing the candidates that have been here tonight, as well as I think about 7 or 8 others, as well as sheriff and district attorney, sheriff, DA. Oh, DA. That's right. DA is up. Excuse me. DA, and then there's 10. How many ballot measures are there?
I don't know yet.
We don't know. At least 10.
Some of them are kind of like hanging in the balance.
But you will, it's a really good opportunity to really hear about what's on the ballot and to really help the club make a decision about the endorsements that we make. So, but there is one more question. Scott Kuiper, you have a question?
Since we touched on housing, almost a question for Ben or the work but basically in the period of 2008 to 2010, certain elements of the San Francisco Police Department waged an unmitigated war on funding against our entertainment and arts community. We lost several established places, many performers in the hiding. We had real job and business losses for our community. I was surprised to find that as supervisors, you were powerless and not able to do anything about it, or you approached the police department with solutions. However,
So repeating the question, it's essentially, to paraphrase, how are you going to support our entertainment community and encourage a better relationship between the enforcing agencies, i.e. the police and ABC, to make sure that we keep this vital industry here?
And I think the Entertainment Commission is a big part of that as well. I think the Entertainment Commission is a big part of helping to set policy for how nightlife is encouraged, stimulated, and protected in San Francisco. We just appointed Glendon and Anaconda Hyde to the Entertainment Commission. I was very proud to make that happen. I think someone who has perspectives like Anaconda, who is an entertainer, who is a drag queen, who lives in the Soma, an area that's greatly impacted by nightlife, and is a tenant in that area and understands what it is to live there, is a good person to have on that commission and can help set policy for how the city can encourage nightlife and also to ensure that our streets are safe and protected. I think the policies that were coming out of the police department were very heavy-handed. They were talking about trying to do a lot of ID checks and to be able to photograph people coming into clubs. I was very alarmed that that was the idea that was coming out of the police department. I had also heard concerns about some officers who were a bit gung-ho about their work and trying to shut down sites and not really follow the letter of the law, I believe, in terms of how they could do their work and making sure that sites were compliant with our local laws. So I think we need to have good communication from the mayor's office with the police department, working with the folks on the Entertainment Commission and the residents in the areas to help make sure that we can have a nightlife that can continue. I'd like to be able to expand hours in the evening, in the early morning for events. I think it's a way to actually make the club safer. When they close at 2 o'clock and everyone has to leave at 2 o'clock, then everyone's on the street at the same time. But if you can keep them open a little bit longer, you can actually spread out the time that people are leaving the clubs. And I think it's much safer for what happens, some of the violence that happens occasionally outside the clubs. And we need to make sure that club owners have really good plans about how they're going to be compliant with the law to make sure that their clubs are not overpacked and that they have everything going the way they should in terms of the conditions in their events, weather events.
So 15 years ago, I moved to San Francisco for probably a lot of the same reasons we all moved to San Francisco. This is an amazing city, but in particular, we have an incredible nightlife. And for probably every week for the first couple years when I moved here, I was out almost every other night of the week at one of the clubs, at one of the restaurants, at one of the bars, because it is one of the most special aspects of, I think, what our city is about. Fast forward to today, when you do have these significant tensions between our nightlife world and the San Francisco Police Department. A couple weeks ago, I got called by a number of club owners who told me that there was a police officer against whom there have been literally close to 24 citizen complaints who was again patrolling the clubs. And I immediately called the commander in charge of entertainment within the police department, as well as spoke to Chief Sir and told him, listen, we need to ensure safety around our nightclubs, but we have to do it in a way that works with our club owners and with the folks that actually attend nightclubs, as opposed to creating a situation, really frankly a powder keg situation, with a police officer, in this case it was Officer Bertrand, that some of you may have heard of, who has gotten pretty close to some of the boundaries of what I think of as appropriate law enforcement. Fortunately, I think we have a new police chief who really gets that. And Officer Bertrand has actually been reassigned to patrol other parts of San Francisco. But part of what I think is the issue here is, in recent years, we've had still too many incidences of violence in and around some of our nighttime establishments. And in fact, there were a number of shootings in my district that required me and other supervisors to help pass legislation to make sure that the handful of clubs that have had a history of violence get dealt with, and to make sure that we're cleaning up the scene, because when we clean it up, we make it safer for everyone. Right now, in my district, North Beach, you have Broadway. It's not necessarily viewed as the safest corner. We had the German tourist who was murdered in Union Square, also in my district. If we're able to tackle these things in cooperation between the police department and nightclubs and other venues. Will make it safer for everyone, such that hopefully we'll be able to continue to bring in both that nighttime economy and the crowds that we love to see at night.
I want to thank you both again for coming and talking with the arts. We are really looking forward to working with you in whatever capacity come November, of course. And look forward to having you join us in our endorsement process as we move forward into August, and really, really appreciate the attention you've given to our community and the issues that affect us. So thank you again for coming. Again, if you haven't joined the Arts Democratic Club, please do it tonight. We have a really wonderful year planned ahead to try and help City Hall move forward some of the issues that we talked about in this report. I think that it's really exciting to have had such a good response here, some really good thought put into this
This has been really
issue.
good for really prompting the change you want to see happen.
That's right, and that's why we're here. We have talked about it for decades now, and it's really time to move it forward. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for coming. Look forward to the next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.